thank you everybody for being here. I'm pleased to be here on one level. On the other hand, it's unfortunate that we have to talk about bushfire recovery. I acknowledge that this area, this region, many of you here personally have had great difficulty, trauma, challenge, but the point is that we all have to move forward after those kind of events. And hopefully today, from the various speakers and the insights, it can just help you that extra notch along the way to building back better. That's really what I'm here to talk about. In a short 20 minutes, obviously I can only skim across a whole series of ideas that are well proven, well known from the unfortunate history of bushfire events across Australia, of which the most recent is by far the most intense, the most widespread, and unfortunately, from my understanding of climate change, weather patterns, we're going to get more. So we need to be well prepared. I live and work in the Blue Mountains, one of the most bushfire prone areas. I have an old house retrofitted to be sustainable on the pretty close to the middle of town, but like many areas around here, the fingers of green come right up to my timber studio in the backyard. I work from home. I have to walk a full 20 metres every day. Shocking distance. It's timber. It won a National Timber Award 20 years ago because it was a story about energy efficient, low embodied energy, recycled, reused. I won't go into that now, that's not what we're about, but it's worth noting that I use timbers. I used Radcon timbers from this area, Silvertop ash as my external cladding. I like the organic nature of the weatherboards. I used plywood. I used organic paints, not plasticized Dulux or commercial ones, but the paint which is made, it comes from Germany or Byron Bay, which is organic, which is low toxicity. There's a whole range of good products like that out there. And then inside I used every little bit of timber product, including packing case foam, the wood shavings from re-milling the timber, all got used in that building construction. So I've been doing this essentially for years, and of course I, like you, have had to learn more and more about bushfire design and bushfire resilience. After a fire like this, suddenly people get aware of what we all love to forget, insurance. Because history shows that typically 30, 40, even 50% have no insurance, and another 30% are underinsured. Fundamental difficulty if we're going to build back. I'm not going to talk about that, I'm not an expert on insurance, but the value of total replacement, in which case it's more of an open book about what the dollar cost is, compared to what many insurance companies want. They want a dollar value. And the fundamental quick point to make here, the only figures commonly available in terms of what is the extra if you have lost your home or have it substantially damaged and you're going to rebuild. This comes from AAMI Insurance Company. Bell low, not much. Bell 12.5 to 40, up to $56,000 extra. These figures are from 2016, so add a few percent. Now, it gets super expensive, and I'll explain more about Bell 40 and Flame Zone shortly. 19 to 73,000 or more. Flame Zone, $250,000 or more. So if you're thinking of a project home at 400,000 or 500,000, if you're in an unfortunate position of rebuilding in Flame Zone, you've just got to add another $250,000. It's huge. You can ask me questions about it later. I won't go into it immediately here and now, but it's just that fundamental that when we build back, the relaxed building regulations of former years do not apply. When you rebuild, you have to know about your BAL rating, and you have to understand that the regulations have already been upgraded, and following most states' inquiries or the national one, it is highly probable that the requirements will be raised again, which does directly affect building cost. There's no shortage of regulations, and unfortunately there's going to be more. Okay, the key ones is really to do with planning and construction. In Victoria, you've got your Bushfire Management Overlay, the BMO. Other states have other variations on it, but there's a couple of key points that the BMO has that other states don't have. In that, the BMO if you're in a bushfire prone area, it's more than just the single house. It also is extended to include so-called dependent persons units, single residents in other forms, so if it's a factory or a school with a caretaker. But interestingly, only New South Wales and Victoria has it. Health, aged care, schools, TAFE unis, childcare centres, old age centres and so on. They all have planning regulations over and above that of construction. Construction standards are written up in Australian Standard 3959. We meet next Monday to look at the next edition. It is entirely based upon construction, the building side of it. So some states, the planning sets up your BAL level and what type of buildings, but right across Australia, AS 3959 is called up by the building code. So that is the one given. And it starts with understanding your BAL level, bushfire attack level. That is the radiant heat per square metre. So it starts at a low level, I'll show you in a moment, and it builds up to flame zone, the most intense. But the BAL assessment, when you come to rebuild, is what has to happen up front. Because when you build or rebuild, if you're in a bushfire prone area, you have to convince the building authority, your local council or private certifier, you have to tell them what the BAL level is. And if you're wrong, or the certifier says, no, sorry, I don't agree, it'll be referred to the CFA, and 9 times out of 10, it'll be probably a notch higher. More onerous, better for safety, but distinctly more expensive. So you need to be aware of that. Now, the Forest and Wood Products Association has been very proactive. They have their own calculator online. So you can look at it yourself. It may not be the last word in accuracy because there are so many variables. And like most of the matters to do with bushfire building, you actually do need expert advice, 99% of the time. So you can certainly get a very good idea by feeding in the information, which is to do with what's called the Fire Danger Index, which for this state is mostly 100, apart from in the alpine areas where it's less. I won't try and explain. The slope under the vegetation, because the fire intensity is directly related to the slope and the nature of that bushland or vegetation, whatever kind it might be. So type of vegetation. There is about 25, if you like, standardized types in the Australian standard, but it varies. Queensland has gone alone. They have 119 vegetation types. And this is why what is meant to be national is fragmenting more and more into different state approaches, although the way to do it is still the same. So the fundamental metric after all of that is, what is your separation distance? What is the defendable space between the edge of the classified bushland or classified vegetation and the slope and the edge of your building? And that magic number totally then will feed back into the BAL level. And bear in mind that just a few meters difference can make a $20,000 or $50,000 difference in your building or rebuilding cost. So you don't design your house, plonk it on the land and then say, oops, it's too expensive. You need to start with the BAL level and then look again at how you can reduce your fire risk and most particularly reduce your costs. So a simple diagram just explaining what John has already alluded to. BAL low is when there is some minor bushfire risk, and that of course can be in the middle of town because of the embers. It's not significant when it comes to bushfire building or rebuilding. BAL 12.5 kilowatts of square metre heat straight at the side of the building, hopefully not straight at you, because it would only take 12.5 and you're going to be fried to a crisp within what, 30 seconds? If you don't have protective gear, you're not set up for it. That's why we need to shelter. What gets important is when you get to BAL 19 and BAL 29. Most conventional houses can survive BAL 19 and BAL 29 without major modifications. It depends very much on the separation distance, the safety between the bushland and the house. Because remember, we're talking here, radiant heat. You're going to get embers all over the place. 80% of house losses come from embers. So going back a decade or two, the mantra was people save houses and houses save people. No longer, not with these fires. They are so much more intense than ever before in heat, severity, speed and the like. So it is BAL 40 and BAL flame zone where everything comes together. BAL flame zone, there is no standard deemed to satisfy. If you have a house, whatever kind, and you have to submit and you say you're BAL flame zone, as my studio now is, then you cannot put in a standard response. It needs a fire engineering response, and the likelihood is that you will be strongly deterred or in some states prevented from building in such an area. All states, including Victoria, now wants people to be BAL 29 or less. The pressure is on not to allow building or rebuilding past BAL 29. So I'm just going to quickly run through the principles, just simply, because these are standard principles that have been around for the last 20 or 30 years. And the point is that great view, but that's could be of the approaching fire. Greater the slope, greater the fire intensity. Steep slope over 18 degrees, it again deemed to satisfy, building inspectors, certifiers, no, we want a fire engineer. You're going to have to pay that, several thousand or more to get someone who is certified and approved by that government body to allow you to build. And of course, that's when you're talking about the hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional cost. Building on ridge tops, building on slopes, that's where the fire is likely to crown. That's where the flame driven by erratic winds has preheated everything, and when the flame or the ignition starts, off it runs. It is the hardest, the worst place to build. If you possibly get a chance, you avoid it. You go up there and have your picnic. You don't put your house on top of the ridge if you expect survival and you're in a bushfire prone area. And of course, one of the great difficulties is most of us love the bush. We want to keep the vegetation, but we now have to be more cautious than ever before in trying to retain site values, but understand if we're going to live there, it's going to present other problems that we need to consider. So when it comes to design, keep it simple. Simple floor plan, simple roof. Don't have things that catch the embers, catch the radiant heat. Keep it low if you possibly can. The materials you're allowed to use depend entirely upon your BAL rating. The standard is written by way of elimination from BAL 12.5, 19, 29, etc. There is fewer and fewer materials that will be permitted. The good news, particularly for Forest and Wood Product Association, is that timbers can be used in all circumstance except sometimes BAL flame zone. I use this on my studio, which is a radially cut timber, because it gets over twice the resource recovery out of every log. It's like fingers of a pie. So all the log gets used, and me being me, I even use the centre as a core for my inbuilt furniture. You don't waste anything if you're trying to be sustainable. And of course, it also doesn't shrink and twist like conventional square cut timber is. You get so much better resource recovery. And the timbers to use, written into the standard, which is this local government and every other, is the hardwoods: blackbutt, spotted gum, turpentine, silvertop ash, which is what that is, red ironbark. They're the best. You can also use Quila or Merbau, a rainforest imported timber. The other list is extensive of species that are permitted once you get to the lower BALs. Don't have time to go into that now. So the wall construction. Now it can be timber framed, conventional stud work, obviously low cost, depending upon how you line it. The bottom 400 millimetres off the ground is at most risk from embers catching. particularly if you're foolish enough to put the mulch running right up to it. So the regulations are different from the lowest 400 millimetres to then up the rest of the wall. Be aware of that. If you're, for example, using timber, you might want brick or steel, corrugated metal for the lowest part, and then use timber above. Obviously, non-combustible works, but it's always in the detail. Vents, weep holes. The Australian standard says gaps of any kind, no more than 2 millimetres. Windows and glazed doors are typically the weak point on standard house construction. And of course, toughened or special glass. You can get ceramic glasses which are not actually technically glass, but of course is clear. You can now get what's called intumescent glass, and that is 2 layers of glass with a plastic interlayer which at a certain temperature goes foggy, misty, but it becomes not fully liquid, but it becomes moist and stops the heat transferring. Little technicality, I was told only recently, oh yes, but it changes at about 60, 70, 80 degrees. If the fire front hasn't licked the place, your insurance won't cover you for those windows which will need total replacement. And now these kind of windows are $3,000 a square metre or more. Okay, think of that. $3,100 per square metre is Par Hammer, which make excellent timber windows, which have been fully fire tested to flame zone. They are the only company using timber that has. There are metal ones, but are less energy efficient. So what I end up doing, I don't have clients who are millionaires usually, we put a fire shutter over a conforming window, which might be BAL 29 or BAL 40. So we might pay $900 a square metre or some such for a double glazed good quality window, and then pay $1,000 or more per square metre for a shutter that comes down and protects. Either the roller shutter, aluminium no longer permitted. There's only a few imported, or companies that import from Germany. It's stainless steel, but it does the job. But of course it's a fairly big head box. I try and hide it in the eave. There's a company that does these kind of Swiss chalet style, very efficient, pretty ugly to my mind. I'm an architect. And also covering awkward shaped windows. You can't do it. But highly effective, and they work in the extreme situations. There are now 2 companies that are doing fabric shutters, which are actually a very fine stainless steel covered, and of course that's a small head box. And they've had problems, which is a word of warning to the wise, that on their websites, both companies said, we are BAL flame zone compliant. I designed to it, submit, my local government says no, because there was then the argument about which fire test has precedent. At the end of the day, it didn't meet the specific bushfire fire test and therefore wasn't permitted in Blue Mountains. Yet, other places it was. It's unfortunately a bit of a luck of the draw. But the 2 companies concerned are in fact getting them fire tested this very moment. Key point, don't put your rubbish under the house. People forget. You have to enclose down below, irrespective of what you build above. Think about the posts, think about everything that is down low, which could be burnable, flammable, because in these kind of fires, they will burn. Decks and verandas are interestingly a problem, because yes, you can use particular timbers. Again, look at your hardwoods, but you can also get caught up in the detail because there is a different requirement if the underside is below 400 millimetres off ground compared to if it's a higher one. But again, be sensible. Think about how flame, if you're in a bad fire, or embers will fester in corners, re-entrant corners, burn the doormat, and then if no one's there, the whole house goes. I personally would never put a tiled roof in a high or extreme bushfire area, but they are permitted because they're totally relying on the sarking behind for fireproofing. Because if you remember that we've got extreme winds, gaps no more than 2 millimetres, every tile in those wind is going to move, and likely, apart from needing to tie down every single tile, they are likely to allow embers to get in. personally wouldn't take the chance. So Bell, I often use Velux roof windows to get natural light and ventilation in back rooms. They're approved up to BAL 40. I've had all kinds of problems with the flame zone rebuilding. Don't have time until. Landscaping's been mentioned, and the CFA has produced the best information in Australia, landscaping for bushfire. On the line, free, and it has the fire-wise planting lists, which looks quite rightly at what are the characteristics that make some plants more susceptible and some more sustainable in a bad bushfire situation. So an excellent product. Every state should have one. And the other point is about design, because you design out bushfire, and it shows 4 different types of gardens in different situations where the landscaping is to minimise your bushfire risk. It is an excellent publication and unique to Australia. And maintenance, you've got to do it. Easy to forget. We've heard about the fire, the timber on the timber veranda. You've got to keep your vegetation away, you keep it down. Many people living in rural properties, one road in, no other way out, not good. If you're serious, you need to look at a bushfire bunker. There is a guideline document on these private bushfire shelters, and that is because there are so many variables, you cannot get it as of right, deemed to satisfy. You must have a fire engineer who addresses the 12 principles that are written in there. But also uniquely for Australia, the Victorian government has provided allowance for up to 12 persons for a private bushfire shelter. So obviously last resort, but essential in rural areas. So Victoria is good. New South Wales, no, they don't like them. Most states in Australia, you don't get an easy approval, but you can easily here. Dedicated water supplies, hopefully a diesel fire pump, not petrol, protected, sheltered, and obviously a non-combustible tank. Different situations require different amounts of stored water written into legislation. I won't bother you with it now, but certainly the more the better. And water spray systems, sprinkler systems. Again, there is an Australian standard I was part of, which I am doing everything I can to get revisited. This one was 2012, to make it more user-friendly and more acceptable. Because again, that is one of the most effective low-cost things that you can do to retrofit a building. This one being at Marysville, a house that did survive because prior to the fire, there's a copper pipe under the gutter and then these individual mist sprays. That saved that house. So hopefully that is going to be an improved situation within the year. There are certainly quite a few around, it's just that they don't meet the standard. The standard has to change to deal with the new realities. So you can build with timber. There's absolutely nothing wrong in using timber in bushfire prone areas as long as you select the right timber for the right application. Durable, hardwood, dense, fire resisting. It's all there, and again the Forest Wood Product Association, excellent. This goes into all the detail that I can't possibly give you today. So if you want to rebuild with timber, you can't go better than going through the fine detail of that publication.